We're not going to have a PowerPoint because the sermon is simply that simple. So 3 points and not really hard to keep up with what's going on. So, and sometimes I think we just need to shift it up a little bit. So I want to talk about this morning enjoying the journey. And that's something that, a lot of times in preaching and teaching, you feel almost hypocritical to talk about certain things because they're things you struggle with so much, right? And one of the things that can be troublesome for us all is learning how to enjoy our journey through life in whatever stage we find ourselves. You know how it goes when we're teenagers. We can't wait till we can drive, and then when we can drive, we can't wait till we can go to college. And when we're in college, we can't wait till we graduate and we can get a job. And then can't wait till we get married, and can't wait till we have our kids, and then can't wait till our kids get in school, and then say can't wait till they get through school, and then can't wait till we get them through college, and then say, and we don't say this all at the same progression, but if we were to monitor ourselves through the years, this would be the message. We would say, I can't wait to get them through there. I can't wait for grandchildren. Can't wait till I retire. Can't wait, can't wait, can't wait. And we never stop to enjoy any moment of our lives. And that's a very real danger, that we're always looking to the next thing instead of enjoying the stage where we are. Now, granted, each stage has its own challenges, and that makes it difficult for us. But it is important that we learn to enjoy the stage of life in which we find ourselves. I remember there was the first place I preached, there was a man there, Thomas Lee Armstrong, and he died about 6 months after I got there. But the man was a walking Bible, was an old tobacco farmer, and had just a memory that was amazing. I mean, still I think he was in his 80s, he was still just rattling them off when we would have conversations and stuff. And he made such a profound impact. Brooke and I were not married at the time. We were engaged but not married. And he made such a profound impact on my life in the 6 months that I was able to spend with him. And he was always a fun guy. And for an example, if he went into the funeral home and Miss Dorothy, his wife, had to go to the bathroom or something when they came in, and so he'd go through the line and they'd say, where's Miss Dorothy? And he said, oh, we separated. And people would go, oh no, what? I didn't. And then she would walk up and say, well, I didn't say how we separated. I mean, just kind of always at something. But he used to always say something I've never forgotten. He used to always say, God's not going to let me come back through here again. He said, so I'm going to have a good time while I'm here. And, I've never forgotten that. Just the way his Christian joy just was contagious. Was just a fun person to be around, and I miss him. And I wish I could talk to him sometimes, but hopefully we'll be able to one day. So to think about this, obviously I think Abraham is an important individual who helps us here. One who was called to go out to a journey. And so what I want us to do is look at this text in Hebrews 11, verses 8 through 10. Verse 8 will be one point, verse 9 another, verse 10 the other point, and help us to understand what this journey of life is about, okay? So in Hebrews chapter 11, beginning in verse 8, by faith Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to a place that he was to receive as an inheritance, and he went out not knowing where he was going. So first, when we look at what's going on, we have the direction of God to Abraham. Now, this direction came to Abraham as we see it in Genesis 12, 1 through 3. The Lord said to Abram, get out. That was Abram, of course, before his name was changed to Abraham. Get out of your country and from your kindred and from your father's house to a land that I will show you. Okay? And he goes on to expound those promises that I will make your name great and you will be a blessing. I will multiply your offspring, and that in you all the families of the earth will be blessed. That was a promise of the Messiah coming through his line. But I want you to think about what that means. So can you imagine Abraham coming home one day, and Abraham lived in Ur of the Chaldees, okay? And so Ur of the Chaldees was a very advanced society. We now know it from archaeological digs. It was extremely advanced, a well-founded city. And so God comes to Abraham, appears to him in some form, communicates to him that he needs to leave all of this behind And he doesn't tell him where he's going. He just says, you're going somewhere. Now, I want you to imagine him coming home also and saying to his wife, Sarai at the time, before her name is changed to Sarah, and say, look, we've got a good life here. This is where our family is. This is what we've always known, but we're about to move. Well, where are we going? Not absolutely certain. How long are we going to be gone? We're not coming back. How are we going to make a living? Not certain about that either. That's what God is asking Abraham and Sarah to do. At his direction, he is sending them out into an unknown place, miles and miles away from everything they've ever known and from everyone they've ever loved, in order to dwell here. And the text says in Hebrews chapter 11 that he obeyed. And you see that in Genesis chapter 12 and verse 4. He packs it up, and there they go. They take off. And they leave behind everything they had ever known and everything that they had ever loved at the direction of God. Now, when we think about this today, of course, God is not going to appear to some individual. He's not going to look at Heath and say, Heath, it's time to quit farming, and I'm going to send you somewhere else, away from all of your family, and I'm going to send you to the ends of the earth, right? I don't expect Him to do that, okay? But God does call us to follow Him. In 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verses 13 and 14, he says to that church that God chose you beforehand for salvation in the belief of the truth. And he said He called you to this by our gospel. So in the preaching of the gospel, God is calling people to Himself. He's calling people to Himself to direct them. Okay? He wants to take control of their lives and direct them in a way that He would have them to go. And sometimes that direction will lead us into places we never would have imagined. Because when we sign up for and when we become Christians, we hand over all of our rights to God and we give Him full control of everything, which is, without a doubt, a very difficult thing to do. So, we obey Him. We go forward in the direction of God into His journey, not knowing where that may lead us. I can tell you something. I had a lot of ideas of what I would be doing at 16 years old, and what I'd be doing now when I was 16 years old. The only problem is it doesn't look anything like it. I've told you this before. We went on a restoration trip when I was in preaching school, and I said, there are two places I'm never going to preach, Kentucky and Alabama. I have spent the last 15 years in Kentucky and Alabama. Those are the only two places I have ever preached. You just never know. But I can also tell you this, through that experience, that what God has given me and who He has given me in those experiences were more than I could have imagined. More than any plan I could have had deserved. And so we go forward at the direction of God. And yes, it is scary sometimes. But yet we trust Him. We trust Him. And so we follow the direction of God. That's Hebrews chapter 11 and verse 8. Then verse 9, he says this. By faith, he went to live in the land of promise as a foreign land, living in tents with Isaac and Jacob, heirs with him of the same promise. And so ultimately, you remember, he ends up in the promised land. Now, what's interesting is God says, I'm going to give you the promised land, but Abraham never actually owns anything in the promised land. As a matter of fact, the only piece of property that Abraham ever owns in the promised land is the place to bury his wife. It's the only property he ever buys. He never actually takes possession of it. His descendants take possession of it in Joshua. Okay? But he goes and he dwells in tents. Okay? Now people say, what's the big deal there? Well, Ur of the Chaldees was a well-established city. He probably lived in a fortified home with a foundation and walls and a roof. Okay? And so he would spend the rest of his life as a nomad, basically, going from one place to the next. And we see this as we watch his life in Genesis 12 through 22, 23. He kind of exits center stage after 22. But we see him going to these different locations and having to pick up stakes and move again and again and again and again. But he's dwelling in these tents, less desirable. Now again, tent here is much more, don't think of a modern day camping tent, okay? Much bigger, much more roomy, things along those lines, but still difficult and still different than living in a well-established home, okay? So he goes out and he does that and he dwells in tents, and the whole time he's waiting on the promises of God. And God has made him several promises. He made him a promise that he would multiply his descendants when he and his body and Sarah's body were both as good as dead. It took about 25 years from the time God called Abraham and told him he would multiply his descendants. It took him about 25 years to get to the point where Isaac was born. He dwelt. The simple, mundane, everyday, day-to-day things. He dwelled in it. Okay? And I think sometimes we forget, I know that I do, because Scripture, of course, is written, the author is writing with a purpose, and so he's stringing together the stories that help fit his purpose as he's communicating it. But there can be large gaps of time between those stories. And we can think that their lives transpired as quickly as we can read them. But there were a lot of mundane days, just called the blah days, you would say, where they were just normal people. Nothing extraordinary was happening. They were just living their lives and dwelling in tents as they did it. And doing so in a foreign land, a land that was not their own. Always viewed as in suspicion as an outsider, and as they continued to get wealthier and wealthier, people began to become more and more suspect of them. So, I want you to think about what that means for us. In the New Testament, especially in Peter's first letter, 1 Peter 1 and verse 1, and then in chapter 2 and verse 11, and then in chapter 1 and verse 17, 3 times Christians are referred to as exiles. Strangers and exiles in the earth. As a matter of fact, in this same chapter here, when he's talking about not just Abraham, but Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, he says this, that in verse 13, these all died in faith, not having received the things promised, but having seen them, greeted them afar off, and having acknowledged that they were strangers and exiles on the earth. What does he mean? We're in a place that's not our home. As we live as Christians, we're living in a world that is corrupted by sin. It's not our permanent residence. It's not our home. We don't, as things progress, sometimes we feel less and less at home in the world, right? We lose people. We see the way society downward spirals sometimes. Decisions that are made, and we think, what in the world is going on here? Well, it's supposed to be strange to us. We don't belong here. Yes, we belong here in the sense that God wants us here. He put us here and we're supposed to influence it. But ultimately, it's not our final destination. Philippians chapter 3, verses 20 and 21 says that our citizenship is in heaven. That's where we belong. And we're waiting for the Savior to come. We're eagerly waiting for Him to come and deliver us and to take us to that. But we're still just exiles. But just as Abraham lived in a tent, so do we. In 2 Corinthians chapter 5 and verse 1, the apostle says that we know that if our earthly house of this tabernacle or this tent were dissolved, we have a building of God not made with hands, eternal in the heavens. He's talking about our body. Because in the previous chapters, in the previous verses, if you forget the chapter division, 2 Corinthians 4 and 5, that chapter division is not very good. But he talks about, though our outward man is decaying, our inward man is being renewed day by day. And so the tent is our body, okay? That is, our soul lives within our body. And our tent is a temporary dwelling. It's not permanent. So, we are living in our tents, in exile, in a place that we don't belong. That's what we're doing. And as we do that, as we dwell, as we journey here, which is what we're talking about, learning how to enjoy that journey, as we dwell, we're going to make mistakes. Genesis 12 to 22 is filled with Abraham's blunders. He lies about his wife twice to save his neck. He gets ahead of God, tries to have, you remember the whole Hagar incident where Ishmael is born, and that creates worlds of trouble that we're actually still dealing with to this present day. He made mistakes. And he had to turn himself around, and God had to come to him. But that's part of dwelling. He had high moments. He had great moments of faith where he did things that we still marvel at even to this day. And in our journey, we're going to have ups and downs. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. Now, for me, this has become very real over the last month or two. I still don't feel 100%, and I want to. And it just doesn't go away as quickly as I want it to, my anxiety issues. Now, I can get upset and say, I want them to go away. Why is it bothering me? Or I can remember that for 15 years I haven't had one. And I do right now. And I survived 15 years ago, and I survived almost 20 years ago. And I'll survive again, even though sometimes it doesn't feel like it. But I can't let the difficulty stop me from enjoying an abundant life that God has given to me. God has shown me a lot of things in this difficulty that I had taken for granted. And I think all of us, as we go through our difficulties, and I'm not trying to say my difficulty, believe me, my difficulty in proportion to other people's difficulties doesn't even deserve to be mentioned. But all of us have been through them and we understand them, right? Hopefully we do. Hopefully we're compassionate toward one another in our struggles. But that's part of the dwelling process. That's part of the purifying process where God is making us into something. Okay? And so we're going to have the ups and downs. We're going to have the backtracks, and where we have to kind of reverse. I think about Scotty's Devo on Wednesday night a few weeks ago where he put the picture up. Do you remember? It had the line, and it had circles and squiggles where you kind of reversed course and had to come back. And life is rarely lived on a straight line. You kind of have setbacks, and then you circle back around, you get back where you're going, and then you take off again and so forth. And that's what our lives are going to be like. But yet we still learn to enjoy them as they come to us. And that's what Abraham, when you study his life, he came to enjoy his relationship with God. There's a reason why God calls him his friend. He walked with him. It took him 25 years, but he finally got it. To the point where when God told him to take his son to the top of a mountain and offer him as an offering, Abraham didn't even blink. Because he said in this same chapter of Hebrews chapter 11, it tells us that Abraham's reasoning was this: God does not break his promises. And I know that if I kill my son, that God would raise him from the dead before he would let him stay dead and break his promise. God doesn't break promises. It took him a long time to learn that. But man, when he got it, he had it. And that's what this process of dwelling will do. Great moments, difficult moments, and some moments that are just kind of, the blah days. Not good, not bad, but everything in between. Now, it has been given to us to have in the church a spiritual family to help us and to encourage us as we make this walk and dwell together. He doesn't send, notice that God didn't send Abram at the time and then Abraham later when his name is changed. He didn't send him to dwell out in the wilderness alone. First of all, God was with him, but he also sent his family with him to help him. And that's what we have. We are strangers and we are exiles, but we're not living alone. There are people with us who are willing to help us and to encourage us as we walk through this thing together. And sometimes we're going to be the encourager. And sometimes we're going to have to be the ones who are encouraged. And God bless us with the humility to accept it when we need the roles to change and we need to be the encouraged. Because that's not always easy. But it is necessary. That which you would give to other people, at some point you've got to realize when you need to receive it from other people as well. And learning to dwell together and building one another up and encouraging one another. 1 Thessalonians chapter 5 and verse 11. We're going to make it, and we're going to make it together. That's the point. Then finally, this is what's driving it all when we come back to verse 10. It gives the reasoning. This is why he did it all. For explanation. He was looking forward to the city that has foundations, whose designer and builder is God. Now, what's interesting when you look at Hebrews chapter 11, which of course you know is a hall of faith, there's this emphasis on seeing or looking. For an example, chapter 11, verse 1. Now, faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. Verse 6 or 7. By faith, Noah, being warned by God concerning events yet unseen. Here you have, in verse 10, Abraham looking forward. Then you have, in verse 13, these all died in faith, not having received the promises, but having seen them, greeted them afar off. That is, they were able to see them with an eye of faith. And then you look at verse 27 about Moses. By faith he left Egypt, not being afraid of the anger of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is invisible. Looking forward to and seeing. That's what faith is about. Seeing what you can't see. Seeing what your physical eyes can't see. But being convinced and persuaded of them. Why did he do that? Why did he dwell in tents? Why did he leave security? Why did he go through all of his difficulties and up and downs? Why? Because he was looking forward to a city that has foundations. Notice that contrast there? He dwelt in tents, verse 9, because he was looking for a city with foundations, whose designer and builder is God. He was looking for something permanent, for something that could not be taken away from him. He was looking for heaven. And that's what this section of Hebrews is about. It's about faith embracing promises. And they use the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to talk about that. The writer of Hebrews, whoever he may be. Now, for us, we have a destination. Just the way that Abraham had a destination that was driving him, we have a destination that drives us. That when we're in the wilderness, we don't throw up our hands and we don't give up, even though we may feel like it. We keep going because we know that there's something we're reaching for. We're reaching for something. We're reaching for a city. We're reaching for a city that is described in Revelation 21. When God finally, for the last time, tears apart the heavens and a new heavens and a new earth come down from God out of heaven. And he calls his faithful children to dwell with him. And he promises to be their God, and they will be his people. And it will be a place, notice, that it's not like the old heavens and earth. It's a new heavens and a new earth, because there's no more death, there's no more sorrow, there's no more crying, there's no more pain. Any negative thing that this world has that you want to insert into that, that's what he's talking about. In that place, none of these things will exist. None of them. So, when we're in the middle of dwelling and dwelling gets difficult, you have to remember your destination. All right? So I'm in the middle of dwelling and it's getting difficult, and I say, you know what? I'm going to give up on God. Okay, then what you got? What you got? You're going to be miserable in your wilderness and you're going to die there. You got nothing. Or as hard as it is, you keep pushing because you got a city. You got a city that has foundations, whose builder and maker is God, and this place is new, and it's nothing like the old. It's perfect in every way. And so we're journeying toward this place. God, through God's direction, we're now coming out of the world and dwelling and being exiles in a wilderness, but we're progressing toward a place in heaven. And because of that, you can learn to enjoy the journey. You can learn to enjoy the ups and downs because we're walking with God. We're walking with each other on our way to heaven. And so we learn to enjoy a journey of life, however that journey may go. You see, Paul said something in 1 Timothy 6 to Timothy, verse 17, about preaching to people who are wealthy in the context. But he makes a statement at the end of that verse that I think is applicable for us when he says, charge those who are rich in this world not to trust in their riches or the uncertainty of riches, but in the living God who richly gives us all things to enjoy. He gave us our life to enjoy. It's a journey of joy because of where it's ending and because of who it is that gave it to us and who it is that's walking with us. And so, just as Abraham has been called, we have been called. We've been directed out of the land. We're dwelling as exiles in a foreign land because we're pressing toward a destination that's worth every bit of it. Maybe this morning somebody needs to listen to the direction of God, to listen to the gospel, and to come out of the world with a penitent faith, confessing Jesus, to be baptized in water for the forgiveness of your sins. Acts 2 and verse 38, you come out of the world. You enter in and you become an exile with other exiles. But you got a destination. Or maybe as New Testament Christians, as we're dwelling in our wilderness, our exile experience, we're struggling with sin, we're struggling with life, we're struggling. Just remember, that thing won't last forever. It won't last forever. And it's going to get better. The destination assures us of that. And so if we can help someone this morning, that's what we want to do, and let's enjoy our journey to heaven together. If we can help you, let us know as we stand and sing this song.